My name is Lon Kieffer, and I am a caregiver. Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, sometimes that gets a round of applause. This apparently is not one of those times. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm a humor-based speaker, so I'll pull you in, or you can just join me right now, and we're going to have some fun together. And, you know, it's okay to laugh about the fact that when I say I'm a caregiver, nobody responds to it, because, frankly, that is the way caregivers think of what they do so often. And what I'm going to talk about today is why you really should not do that, why you should embrace what you do and focus on what you do rather than what you don't do. My expertise is the caregiver personality, and my goal in life is to create what I call pro-per caring relationships with professional caregivers and personal family caregivers working together in collaboration rather than competing silently for how things are going to happen, because it sort of occurs in the industry, and it creates a wall of two sides of people that want to accomplish the same goal from working together. Now, the talk I'm giving today is known as Defending the Caregiver, and it's actually conceived as a play. And in the proper setting and in the proper build-up, I come out and I do a play about the night that I learned that I was a caregiver. And it's very common when I introduce myself as a caregiver that there's no reaction. Half the people don't recognize themselves as a caregiver, or the others are like, yeah, so what? You know, you're a caregiver, I'm a caregiver too, and we dismiss it. And I really want to talk about why we should celebrate it and the difference that it can make in our lives. So in the play, Toby Keith's song, I Want to Talk About Me, plays for a second. And do you know this song? And it's, I can't sing, I got a cold, I can't sing even when I don't have a cold, just to be clear. But Toby Keith's song is usually we talk about you, but today I want to talk about me. And that plays for a while, and then I take the stage and I say, ladies and gentlemen, we're gathered here today at Salisbury University to talk about me. Thank you for coming. But then I tell them that don't worry, somehow I think in talking about me, I'm also going to be talking about you. Because we all walk similar paths in life, especially when we end up on a caregiver path. And then I ask the audience if it's okay if I tell you the story about the night that I became aware and actualized as a caregiver. And then the audience says, yeah, but they usually applaud. Again, thank you. So we're gonna go there in a minute, and we're gonna share the story about the night that I became a caregiver, that I became aware that I was a caregiver. But before I do that, I want to share a little bit of statistics with you. The Family Caregiver Alliance says that there are 67.5 million people in the United States that meet their definition of caregivers. That's roughly 20% of the population. There was an article in Delaware about a year and a half ago that said 3 in 5 people are going to be in a caregiver role at some point in their life. I'll disclose to you that my definition of caregiver is way broader than yours. My definition of caregiver includes just about everyone. On Facebook, I have a page, Defender of Caregivers, and I don't do a lot on Facebook anymore just because it's not always a good place to be. Although if you find comfort in it, please, I'm not trying to take that away from you. But in my early days as the Defender of Caregivers on Facebook, I would actually have some of my followers argue the fact that I or someone else was a caregiver because we were walking a slightly different path than they were walking. And I literally had a conversation that, between a paraplegic caregiver for a paraplegic and a quadriplegic, that they were two different things because one had more of a burden than the other. And when I use the term caregiver, it's as broad as it can be. It's all-inclusive, both professional and personal people that are walking this path. Now, There are two ways to become a caregiver. There's nature and nurture. We understand the nature and nurture concept. Nature is we're born a certain way, and nurture is life circumstances nurture us or beat us into a certain way. There is a measurable caregiver personality according to Myers-Briggs. And our personalities can morph over time based on our circumstances. So the nature caregiver is someone that will be drawn to the role because it's in them. The nature caregiver, if you want a philosophy, the philosopher of the nature caregiver is Popeye. Popeye says, I am what I am. And they're born as a caregiver. Then there's the nurture caregiver. Now, the word nurture is kind of tricky here because it doesn't necessarily mean this person is nurturing. It means that their circumstances has nurtured them into being a caregiver, like born with an E by accepting a burden or responsibility, a burden of joy, a burden of love, but a burden nonetheless. And they become a caregiver somewhat reluctantly. They're not naturally drawn there. They're nurtured into it by their circumstances. And the philosopher for this is Aristotle, who says, I am what I repeatedly do. I am what I repeatedly do. So we've got these two different types of caregivers. And I am going to get to the story about when I realized I first was a caregiver. And it's going to be amazing. But the point behind nature and nurture is that when we're caregivers, this is what Myers-Briggs says about caregivers. Caregivers are people that take satisfaction in pleasing others. You're either going to like that or not like that, the base way that sounds. You're sitting there going, there ain't nothing satisfying about the life I'm leading right now. But there is, in a way, because it's not like you're going to spike the football and say, yeah, I'm satisfied with what I just did or the burdens that I'm carrying. But you are avoiding guilt or angst that you would suffer if you didn't take on those responsibilities. There's something I call, and I gave you a handout, there's something I call the caregiver gap. The caregiver gap is a process that caregivers go through before they get to a point where they can actually accept help. There's also 3 steps on their awareness, acceptance, and allowance, and these will be in the stories that I'm getting ready to tell you. But the caregiver gap is this. The nature caregiver feels guilt if they don't take on these responsibilities because they're naturally drawn to providing these type of services for others. The nurture caregiver, who is not naturally predisposed to doing this but is doing it because they have a responsibility that has come to them, they feel anger for having to change who they are in the moment. So you've got guilt, anger, and hopefully in the end we can get to P for proper, a proper relationship where they can accept help in their life to allow them to, address these burdens however they can in a way that does not cause them to lose themselves. I've worked professionally in the caregiver industry for a long time, and I've seen a lot of anger come towards myself and my peers for situations that occur, situations that are not nice, but also in many ways not avoidable. And when families or personal caregivers are angry at the professionals, I say, good, that's progress, because they're not guilty. Guilt is anger towards yourself. Anger is towards someone else. So when we're in this pro-per relationship, one of the things that we need to learn to do is accept that anger without judging it, without personalizing it, which is a distorted thought, and without creating a wedge between us and those that we want to serve. So the gap of guilt, anger, and pro-per is a progression. These 67.5 million people that are caregivers meeting the National Caregiver Alliance's, Family Caregiver Alliance's definition are 5 times more likely to have depression and a third as likely to seek treatment for it. Because caregivers feel that this is their responsibility, it is something they should do. See, this is the trick. This is the mental trick that happens with caregivers. Most caregivers are taking care of By show of hands, who's taking care of or supporting a spouse? Okay. How about a child with early onset or born with special needs? We think of ourselves as a spouse. We think of ourselves as a parent. We don't think of ourselves as a caregiver, and that's a trick. Because we think, oh, I'm not doing anything special. I'm doing what I should do as a husband or as a wife or as a parent. So therefore, they don't take credit for what they're doing because they should do it. That's a shitty attitude. Thank you for catching that, those that were listening. When you live with a shitty attitude, you don't take credit for what you do. You dismiss it as being, it's what I should do. It's what I was supposed to do. It's because you still think of yourself as a spouse or a parent, and you clearly are. First, you are. But if you're primarily acting as a caregiver because of the circumstances at hand, if you start to think of yourself as a caregiver, you can then start to take credit for the things that you're doing. You can then start to share the burdens with other caregivers because these are no longer spousal or parental duties. These are caregiver duties. And the minute you embrace the role caregiver, guess what you get? You get to be a spouse or a parent. And now I'm going to go into my own story, and you're going to hear how some of this plays out, and perhaps you'll visualize how it might play out in an actual play. And if you have a venue where would you like me to come do this, I hope that you'll get in touch with me afterwards. I travel around in a neat little van with a cute little dog. I am fighting something here, so I'm sorry for these pauses to hydrate. So are you ready for the story about the night that I became a caregiver? You getting that applause thing down? You getting that down? I like that. That's good. That's good. Are you a local? Okay, so you can say that. I thought it, but I would never say it. Actually, I've been down here for 25 years, and I was told just the other day I'm still a come here. So the story of the night that I embraced the fact that I was a caregiver was a fitful night for me. It was really, in many ways, one of the saddest nights of my life. It was a night that I had gone to my father on his deathbed. My father had a notorious military and mental history career. People don't want to talk about mental illness, which I don't understand. Growing up, my father had a mental illness, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. But my buddy's father had a back problem, and that's all we talked about. I'm telling you, my father was a lot more fun. But we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to get help. But, the back problem becomes our life's accomplishment. How you doing today? Oh, I'm all right. So my dad moved around a lot, and I hadn't been in touch with him for several years when I got the call that he was on his deathbed. My sisters and I did what most families do. We rushed to the bedside. I wasn't upset with my dad. I didn't have any ill will towards him. I missed him. So when I had the opportunity to get closure, I took it, and I flew to his bedside, and I stayed as long as I could. But I was a stressed man. I had my father on his deathbed. I had, as a single father, my kids who were young at the time back home waiting for me. I had a busy career, and I had to put all that on hold, and I had to get my mom, my father's ex-wife, to watch my kids and hold down the home front while I went out and did this. And after seeing my dad for a little while, he was alert and coherent, but he was clearly dying. And see, this is the thing about caregivers, is your families rely on you in ways that are already beyond your capability for what you're already carrying. And since I was a professional caregiver, I was the decision maker for the family. I was the one that was going to have to say yes or no as whether we were going to continue to treat my father, knowing full well that it wasn't going to save his life. He was going to die. It was very clear. But because I had these burdens back home, I left. My sister, who had no children, stayed to be at his bedside. And the story I'm going to tell you now is about my trip home. As I'm walking through the airport, busy and stressed, pulling one of those rolling suitcases that just doesn't want to roll properly. This is before they had the ones that stand up and just glide like they're a hoverboard. So I'm walking around, and I have my briefcase with me because I thought I was going to do some work, and I have my suit jacket with me because it was a more formal time back then, and I'm going through this airport, and I'm exhausted, and I stop at one of those magazine places to get my dinner, which was a warm water and a pack of Nabisco crackers. Dinner that doesn't even resemble food. Hard, square, orange, just like food in nature. That was my dinner for the night. That's how much I valued myself. But the reality is I just didn't have time. And I was burdened and stressed, and I was walking through. You know how when you're having a bad day, what makes you more angry than anything? Somebody that's having a good day. You just want to trip them or something, just so that you're not alone in the way you're feeling for that day. Take the good away from their day a little bit and let them come over to the dark side with you and experience it. So I'm walking through the airport with all this stuff, and I see this kid, and the kid didn't do anything wrong except enjoy his life, and I immediately fixated on him. He's walking through the airport with a backpack over his shoulder and earbuds in his ears. So he's listening to music piped in directly for his listening pleasure, whereas I'm listening to everybody's problems and all the noise in the airport, dragging this thing, and he's walking around with this backpack as if he's going, look at me, one hand behind my back. Life's that easy. I got one hand completely free. And I looked at him and said, come close enough and I'm going to knock you right down on the ground. That's what I'm saying to myself. So anyway, I go and I sit down. I got a little bit of time for my flight. I go and I sit down. And as soon as I sit down, it was the last table in a little bistro. And I sit there, was a seating for two. And I sit there and I just go, whew, I'm exhausted. But I got there before the plane was ready to leave. Rare. I was actually a little bit early. And I'm just lost in thought. And the point of this whole story that I'm going to tell you is how our burdens and responsibilities can cause us to be confused and conflicted and distorted in the way we think and the way we make decisions because we have stress. This is natural. This is natural. It's called cognitive distortions. I call them caregiver distortions. So I was sitting down and my mind is watering, and I look up, and what do I see but little one-armed joyful bandit walking straight towards me. And what does he do? He sits right down next to me. And he doesn't even take out his earbuds. He just kind of looks at me, and he goes, he does one of these things. He goes like, a little nod as if to say, hey, man, can I sit down? But it's just a little nod. I used a similar expression, and I looked at him like, like a dog that heard something he didn't understand, So we're just sitting there in this nonverbal relationship, and I'm just kind of angry. And so I just reach down and I open my pack of crackers and I eat one of my crackers. I put it in my mouth, dry. I'm starting to open my water up to take a sip. And what does this kid do? He reaches out and takes one of my crackers and puts it in his mouth. I'm looking at him, and I didn't like him already. I'm really angry with him now. So I just look at him, and I reach down and I take another cracker and I put it in my mouth, and I look at him like. So he reaches forward and takes another cracker, and this time he holds it up as if to toast me, puts it in his mouth, and smiles at me. I'm thinking, man, I'm going to get up and teach this kid a lesson. But then I remembered he's like 20 years younger than me. I got this bad knee, and I started to talk, but I had nothing but dust in my mouth, and hell flew into me, fury. I reached down and grabbed the last two crackers and crammed them both in my mouth at the same time. I think I had to pull a little bit of the wrapper out of my mouth. And then just as I'm thinking to talk to this guy, but I can't, I hear final boarding call, passenger Kieffer, gate B12 for Baltimore. Final boarding call, passenger Kieffer, gate B12. So I get up. And I start running. I'm about to miss my plane because I'd gotten distorted and conflicted in what was going on. So I get up and I start running towards the plane, and I'm pulling all this, and I'm going there. This is back in the day when you still had paper boarding passes, and I'm looking for my boarding pass. And inside my jacket, I still hadn't found my boarding pass, but what did I find? My pack of crackers. So the crackers that we were eating were his crackers. That's how distorted I was. Now, here's a trick. Some of you might be sitting there thinking that this guy's not very original because you've heard that story before. That story was true. It actually happened. That story has also been around since 1912 and retold hundreds of times, and I've heard that story. And I was still so caught up in the moment that that actually happened to me. I didn't deserve it, but I want a round of applause because I'm going to get something to drink. That was a blatant attempt to be smooth at drinking water, which I might have gotten away with, and now I'm kind of negating that smoothness by sharing it with you. So anyway, after that, I go and I get on the plane, and I relax, and I did something I rarely do. I gave up my seat on the aisle where I'm in control, and I agreed to sit at the window seat so that a woman and her daughter who had been split up could sit together. And I did another thing I rarely do is I just gave in. Not to another human being, mind you. I'm going to go it myself, but I gave in to the plane. I just leaned into the plane, and I immediately fell asleep. And at some point, you know how on a plane time goes, time becomes weird. You lose track of time. Sometimes it seems to go faster. Sometimes it seems to go slower. I have no idea how long I was asleep, but I'm asleep on the plane, and I hear this voice, ease his pain. Ease his pain. I know what you're thinking, that James Earl Jones and Kevin Costner are sitting behind me running lines for the Field of Dreams. That's what I was thinking too, because this woke me up. I mean, I heard it so loud in my mind that it woke me up from a sleep. And I immediately said, ease his pain. I watched that movie. What do you mean, ease his pain? Play catch with my dad? I played catch with my dad every chance I got. I just gave up my family responsibilities to go by his bedside. What do you mean, ease his pain? I've always done everything that I can do for this relationship. Ease his pain. Go away, I'm getting some sleep. I mean, this is all in my mind, because I'm not crazy. I'm not talking. This is a conversation in my mind. I fall back asleep. And I wake up to another sound, and it says, let me help. I can help. I'm like, you can help me do what? You're a voice in my head. I don't need any help. I got this. I just need to get back home, take care of my kids. My sister's back there with my dad. Just leave me alone. I don't need any help. Fall back asleep. A little while later, the voice comes back to me, and it says, you like to argue. I'm like, what do you mean I like to argue? This is, again, just me having a conversation in my own head. And the voice says, yeah, you like to argue, and you argue like a woman. The voice said that, people. Don't be upset with me. You argue like a woman with no logic. Yeah, I'm like, with no logic? How am I arguing like a woman with no logic? Because women and people that are caring for other people don't have logic when they argue. They feel that they can argue both sides of an equation and win the argument because they think they can do everything and they can't. I've come to you twice now, and one time you said, you've done everything you can. How dare I ask you to do more? The next time I come and offer you help and you say, no, you're fine, you got this, so which is it? You're stressed or you're okay? It can't be both. You know what? Not only do you argue illogically, you're a liar. And the biggest lie you tell is that you're fine when you're not. I'm like, where is this conversation going? Look, I'm just trying to get home to my family, and the voice says to me, we're going to have more conversations tonight because you've got a lot to learn about yourself and about life. I'm like, who are you anyway? And the voice says to me, I'm Doc. Sleep now. You'll need your rest. And so I fell asleep, and I slept the rest of the way. The rest of the flight, landed in Baltimore, called my mom, said that I'm coming home. I lived in, by God, Seaford at that point. So I had a 2-hour drive home, and I get there, and my mom's asleep on the couch. And taking care of my kids, and I walked in. And I'm not going to lie, at this point, even though it was late in the middle of the night, I kind of just wanted my mom to leave because I wanted to just sort of restore the balance and my influence in my own home because, my mom was really eminently qualified to raise me. I'm not so sure she was capable of raising my kids, though. So I just wanted to restore the balance, be back in control. And I'm walking around checking out the house, going over here to this window, checking on that, and then looking at that door, checking on that. And I wanted to know how the kids were. And I opened the door and I looked in and they were sleeping soundly. So I, of course, had to wake them up because that's the only way to know that they're sleeping soundly. So I went through all of that. And then my mom did leave. So it was just me back in my house, back in control. And I lay down and I go to sleep. Now remember, Doc said he was going to come back and visit me again tonight. So I'm woken up again. This time, though, it's not the voice in my head. It's the phone ringing. And it's the doctor from Minnesota calling to tell me that my dad's going to pass unless they do something, and what was my decision. If anybody's ever gotten that call or is in a position to get that call, that is not a decision. That decision has already been made. That is a guilt trip waiting for you to accept or reject. And I suggest you reject it. That decision has already been made. That call is going to come. It is impossible to divorce yourself from the thoughts of it. But the decision has already been made. At that point, your choice is only to be guilty or to be free by confirming the decision. You know what guilt is? Guilt is a process of gathering unrealistic, illogical, loathing thoughts. And when you apply them to yourself, you're guilty. Gathering unrealistic, illogical, loathing thoughts. So I had that call come to me, and I said no. And here's what the doctor said. Now, you got to understand, there's two people on this phone call, and both of you are having a hard time. The difference is for you, it's personal. For him, it's professional. Happen to be a man. Professionally, they want to do everything they can do too. And this is what he said to me. He goes, I'm honor-bound to remind you that your father's cancer is curable. We can treat his cancer. Your father, however, is not going to be able to survive it. He is too far gone. So now that doubt came back in my head. But I stuck the course because, I wasn't alone in this decision. I had two sisters and we all made it. We all made the decision together. But it was still tough. But this is not a decision. This is a guilt trip waiting for you to accept. So I chose to reject the guilt trip and I rolled over and went back to sleep. And I surprisingly slept fairly well until this damn voice came back. And the voice said, you ready? And I said, ready for what? And the voice said, let me remind you, I'm Doc. And I'm going to come to you 3 times tonight. And we're going to talk about stories from your past. And you're going to share with me your perspective as an individual. And I'm going to share with you my perspective as somebody that's watching you without emotion. I want you to tell me the story about the blessings of running a nursing home. A lot of people say, oh, a nursing home is so depressing. It's not depressing. It's a blessing. I mean, it ain't pretty all the time. I tell people that both move into a nursing home as a family to collaborate with the professionals that are there and people that come there to work, that a nursing home, like anything else in your life, is somewhere between, purgatory and perfection. And it's your job to find a happy place between those two extremes. If you think it's purgatory, it will be. If you think it's perfection, it won't be, so then you'll be thinking it's purgatory. You got to look for the perfection in between. A lot of beautiful things happen in nursing homes, and a lot of things that aren't so beautiful happen, but most of them are unavoidable. Truly, they are. And it's how we handle them together in pro-per relationships with respect. But one thing, thank you, one thing that is amazing about the lessons that I learned and the blessings of working in a nursing home is that, I mean, look at me. I work in a nursing home. I get better looking every day. Yeah, I promise you, these hundreds of women can't be wrong. Yeah. And these are seasoned veteran women that know a fine-looking man when they see one. You got a lot of cougars in nursing homes, I'm telling you right now. You know, I never thought it would be true, but, you know, when a 88-year-old woman comes up to you and says, "You're nice looking," it feels kind of good. Tell me the story about Garfield. Garfield was a man that when I moved to Sussex County 24, 25 years ago, he welcomed me with open arms. I came down as a city boy, and I made a lot of not very good friends early on because I was a city boy. And Garfield was a country boy down there waiting for me. Garfield used to say to me, "You learned librarian, I learned laboring," you know, that I was a academic and he was a, you know, life's worker. Garfield taught me a lot. He taught me how to fish, and because I was bad at fishing, he refused to teach me how to hunt. Garfield taught me what it was like to have a rural existence and grounded values and broad family networks. Garfield taught me what it was like to be a black man in the 60s, if that's a lesson you can learn drinking scotch on a back porch. Garfield taught me a lot, and I loved him. Garfield was about 20 years older than me. Over the time that I knew Garfield, his family moved away. Kids grew up, moved off, left the area. Kids were already grown, but their kids moved, and they went to be with them, and before long, it was just Garfield and I. And when the family decided that Garfield could no longer live by himself, they said, "This is great, Lon. You run a nursing home and an assisted living facility, and you know Garfield, you love Garfield. You're like the perfect solution for our family all rolled into one. We know he'll be in good hands with you." So Garfield did. He moved into my nursing home. And here's where it gets tricky, because now I was both a pro and a per caregiver. I was a professional caregiver running the place and a personal caregiver in that he literally was like family to me. And I was distorted and conflicted in how I did things. And Garfield had a tendency to like to walk around the campus to get exercise, but Garfield was starting to show early signs of dementia. And my professional team, who I went through many battles and wars with, came to me and said, "You know, we really need to sit down and talk to Garfield about taking his walks." And conflicted as I was in the pro-per world, I took the personal side, an adversarial side, with people that I'd worked with for many years and trusted and believed in, and I said, "No, that's not the way this is going to happen. You're not going to disrespect Garfield. If Garfield wants to take his walks, you're just going to have to walk with him. And that's the way it's going to be. I'm in charge." And so that's the way it was. And because I would like to lead by example, every now and then I would take a walk with Garfield. I didn't want to ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. So one morning I came in early. You know, the truth of the matter is, I had a job interview later that day because I was thinking about leaving, and I had a pair of brand new shoes on. And as I was walking through, I was thinking of this interview. I wasn't thinking about anybody but I was being very selfish. And I saw Garfield at the desk wanting to go for a walk, and they were exasperated. And to prove a point, I said, "I'll go for a walk with Garfield." But again, my head wasn't in it. So Garfield and I start on this walk. Now, you know what a walker is? It's a mechanical device designed to trip the elderly. Yeah, a walker, this is how you're supposed to use a walker. Put it forward, step into it, put it forward again, alternating foot, step into it. But most people use a walker kind of like a divining rod. You know, it controls speed and direction. So Garfield had the walker, and we're walking, and sometimes Garfield would storm off ahead, and I'd have to keep up with him. Sometimes he'd sat there and talked to me. Other times he'd lag behind. Well, this is one of those. And I'm like, Garfield, you know, come on. You're the one that wanted to go on this walk. You know, and he's like, rah, rah, rah. And I said, Garfield, tell me something. I said, why is it you go on so many walks? And he says to me, women. The second time, right? This was Garfield that said it this time, so don't get upset with me. He said, women. I said, what? And Garfield took his hand off the walker and went, wah, 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 wah. Now, it is undeniable, it's proven, that women are more vocal than men. They use more words in the course of a day than men do. And what Garfield indicated to me in that moment was that Garfield was not a risk for wandering. Garfield was regulating his own emotions and his own behavior in a milieu that he could not control. He was getting too much stimulation, so he would go for a walk. So as I'm walking along with Garfield, we take a left and we turn down the path, service corridor, and Garfield's walking off in the grass. And I'm like, why is he walking in the grass? It's still early morning, there's dew on the grass, I got brand new shoes on. Garfield is a wandering risk, not a fall risk, so I justified that I don't have to walk in the grass with him, and I stayed on the road. We get about halfway down the road, and behind me I hear, and I jump out of my new shoes, I look behind me, and a service truck, a delivery truck is coming down the service corridor. Garfield's standing over here in the wet grass with his walker, and he goes, that's why I walk over here. So that's my story about Garfield, a man that taught me a lot about life and that I now thought was not capable and needed me to defend him. And Doc, the voice, says, are you done with this one? Because you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you next. You know, you started out defending Garfield, and for that I love you, because I know you love him. And we do this. Out of an abundance of caution, we protect people, but we protect them from the good things in life because we cannot tolerate anything negative happening to them. Negative things happen all the time. When you learn to ride a bicycle, you fall and skin your knee. You grow up taking acceptable risks all your life. Now, all of a sudden, we can't take any risks. Just like you taking on more burdens than you can handle, more responsibilities that you can handle, and saying to yourself, I got this. I got this. You know, we're only born with two natural fears in life. The fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. Yet when other people tell you that you're taking on too much, that you're going to fail, and they get louder and louder in saying that you need help, that you're going to fail, you can't keep up, the louder and louder it gets, the closer and closer you step to the ledge by taking on more and more responsibilities. And what you do in the process is you dismiss the capabilities of the very person that you're trying to protect. You dismiss the assistance that can come to your side. Doc said to me, he goes, you know, when you went in there with your professional team and you told them they were wrong and they were not going to disrespect Garfield, you know what you actually did? You disregarded Garfield, which is far worse, but you did it out of love. I just want you to accept that you don't always have the right answer. Accept that you don't always have to make all the decisions. Accept that you can take advice from other people. Accept that you can accept a negative outcome every now and then. This is a lesson of acceptance. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. You don't always have to lead. I said to the voice, I said, you know, I don't like your version of my stories. And I fell back asleep, knowing that there was only one more story, one more visit that I was going to have to endure. He told me it was going to be 3 stories. So I fell back asleep feeling positive that this journey was going to come to an end. This journey of introspection was soon going to come to an end. And again, I don't know how long, but the voice came back to me and it said, let's do this thing. We're almost done, and I'm sure you're ready to get it done, but you're going to be surprised, I think, where this story ends and how this ends. And it all starts at the very beginning. He goes, I want you to tell me the story about the night that you worked in the intensive care unit early in your career. This is an embarrassing story, I'm not going to lie to you. Remember I told you there's a thing called distortions? Cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions are the way we all make decisions when we're under stress. I call them caregiver distortions because caregivers have more chronic stress by report of Family Caregiver Alliance than the rest of the population. So if stress causes us to think in distorted ways, caregiving causes us to think in distorted ways. I'm not knocking us, not knocking caregivers. I'm actually giving you the utmost of respect, but we think in distorted ways. We think that we have to do things. We think with a shouldy attitude. We think that we have to do things because others can't do them as well as we do, that we're the only one that can do things. We have this playing through our minds. There's other things. There's should statements. There's mental filtering. There's personalization where we think something has to do with us when it really doesn't. There's jumping to conclusions. There's the binocular trick where our accomplishments we diminish and say they don't count, and other people's accomplishments we elevate and say they're amazing. These are all cognitive distortions that we use. Well, at this stage in my life, I was broke as a joke. I was in graduate school. I was a new nurse. I was a newlywed. I was a new father. I had a new house and a new car and a newly reduced bank account. I was broke as a joke, and everything in my life I thought about through money. And I was working as the clinical supervisor in Baltimore's Lock Raven VA hospital. And my job was to check on all the staffing and all the unit throughout the whole hospital. And if anybody called out, I had to replace the shift. If anybody needed a drug that they didn't have in their cart, I, as a single lone man, I don't mean marital status, I just mean me alone, with keys, would go into a pharmacy and get whatever I wanted. This was a very long time ago, when trust was rampant in our society. You could never do that now. And I would also run the codes. Whenever there was a code, I would show up and be behind the cart working with the doctors and everybody. Well, and I was working crazy shifts and going to grad school. So this one night, somebody called out sick. And I was having a hard time replacing them, and I was thinking, we need a nurse in the intensive care unit. I happen to be a nurse who will make overtime if he works that shift. So I assigned myself to work the intensive care unit. But because of the distorted thoughts of my need for money, I'd forgotten that I'd never worked in the intensive care unit before. And in this case, a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. There's different, especially, so I walked into the intensive care unit already having worked like 12 hours. And I was tired to begin with at the shift, and I walked in. I was immediately like I'd had a jolt of coffee because of all the stimulation in there. There was, monitors everywhere, like bells and whistles, like ding, ding, ding. You can imagine. I felt like a 12-year-old kid walking the boardwalk going into an arcade. There was so much going on. But I didn't have any quarters in my pocket. I couldn't play any of the games. So I got lucky, though. I only had 3 patients that night, one of each kind. Now, in today's world, that opens a lot of thoughts. But this was like 30 years ago, and one of each kind meant that I had one patient that was going to live and move out the next morning. I had another patient that was going to die, and another patient that we weren't sure, that really needed my attention. I knew what to do with the one that was going to live. I used my sense of humor. Out of here, don't need you no more. Out of here in the morning. Joked around with them. That was in Bay 1. In Bay 3 was a person that was going to die. I knew how to handle that too. I focused on comfort care and the family and support. Are you okay? Is he okay? Understood that fine. It was the person in number 2 that I didn't know how to handle. It was a man at that time about my age now, a little bit overweight like me, just a little bit overweight. He'd had a massive heart attack, and he was on all these monitors and ding, ding, ding. He's alert and oriented, sitting there watching an Orioles game in extra innings late night with this monitor and the TV. And when I'd go from 1 with my humor and 3 with my, my sympathy and my support, I'd stop and I'd look at room 2, and then I'd be going on and I'd linger and look at it. If you're looking for a negative, you'll find a negative. And if you're behaving in a certain way, people will pick up on that. And after a while, the guy in 2 started noticing what I was paying attention to him, and he was joking around with me. He'd be like, "I'm still here, doing just fine." A couple hours into the shift, I'm exhausted. I'm afraid I'm going to fall asleep. And we do this a lot of times. We create self-fulfilling prophecies. We're afraid of something, and then we actually make it happen. It's like we will it to in our mind subconsciously. So rather than staying at the nurse's station, I decided I'm going to go sit at the bedside with him in case something should happen. I'll be right there for him. And I said a little prayer to myself, even though I'm not a praying man. I said, "Please, Lord, don't let me do anything that will harm this man." So I'm sitting there next to him. We actually had a conversation. I said, "I'm just going to sit here and chart for a little while. I want to, And you know what happened, right? I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I fell asleep. And I'm not talking about that thing that happens when we're driving and we nod off a little bit where our chin touches our chest and we pop right back. I'm talking about drool rolling out of the side of my mouth. I was out cold. I wake up to hear what has got to be the most frightening sound you ever want to hear as a health professional. It went kind of like this. Eee. Oh my God, what have I done? Oh my God. I go through the motions, I call out the code, I jump up on the guy's chest and start doing compressions, and as soon as all the doctors start running in the room, I hear, "This has been a test of the emergency broadcast system." True story, slightly embellished. TV signing off for the night. Remember how they used to do that? Now they got that, it's because of this story that they changed that signal. The patient shoots straight up in bed, and he looks at me and goes, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm just looking at him kind of embarrassed, and the docs, and he says to me, and this is the funniest thing I've ever heard, he says to me, he goes, "Listen, I just checked on you 5 minutes ago. And you were resting comfortably." Oh, now the applause. Now, there's a saying in healthcare that if it isn't written, it didn't happen. I did not write a note about this. This is just our little secret. So that's the story of my first night working in an intensive care unit and why I worked in the intensive care unit and how my thought process and my fixation on being broke got me caught up beyond my abilities, beyond my skill set. And now Doc, the voice comes in, as I just told this story for his and my benefit alone in a bedroom. And Doc says, "I don't really even need to say anything, do I? The way you told that story tells you what I was going to say. You're thinking about more things than what's before you. You're not making the best of decisions." But the biggest thing that happened there is that you viewed your patient as relying on you 100%. You didn't acknowledge that you were in a relationship the minute you met, that it was two-way, that while you're caring for them, they're caring for you. So if you think that you're alone and it's only you, even if you are alone and it's only you, you are sadly mistaken because you're in a relationship. The person you're caring for is also caring for you. You're already accepting the help of others, even if it is someone that is incapable of help. There's nothing wrong with accepting the help of other people on this journey. You're already not alone. It's just the way that you view it. It's not about you. You were in a relationship before this phase of the relationship started. Being a caregiver is not a permanent situation. It's transient. It's transformational. It'll change you, but you have to change to survive it. When you were a kid, you would role play. One minute you were a cowboy shooting Indians. You'd have a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, and then you'd become an Indian shooting cowboys. When you were a child, you wanted to be a professional athlete or a fireman. You became a nurse. You understood that these are phases. But the minute you take on the role of caregiver, you think that the world has stopped, and that's your destiny and your future. It's not. You're still a man. There will be a you after this. Recognize that you're a man, but embrace that you're a caregiver so that you can be a man. And at this point, I was starting to tear up a little bit, and I said to the voice, I said, I just can't take any more of this. I lost my dad, now kind of lost who I thought I was, and I have to embrace myself as something different. I said, you've told me a lot of stories. You knew about my stories. I don't get how you knew that. How do you know all these stories? And Doc says, because I'm in you. I've been in you all along. I was in you when you would go to a ball game and walk by somebody that had a cast on in the stands and your arm would tingle. I was with you when you were on the bus and that little girl with her mother got on the bus. I was the voice that said, catch her. And then the bus stopped and she jolted backwards and you reached out and grabbed her. I was in you when your dad left you. I've been in you all the time. But like everybody else that was trying to tell you things, and the story about the crackers, you weren't ready to hear it. I've been talking to you your whole life. Acknowledge that I'm in here. Listen to the good voices in your head. I'm there with you. I'm the defender of caregivers. And you're an amazing man. Is what the voice said to me, and then I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I'm like, Doc, where are you? Where are you? And then I remembered he said he's in me. Damn, this is a sad way to end this story. But it's a positive way to end this story because you can develop these thoughts in yourself. But you have to have positive thoughts about yourself. Every time you focus on a negative, you've got to bury it with a positive that you've done something amazing. You've taken on a burden or responsibility that many other people don't. You think this is something you should do. You think this is something that you have to do, but that's not true. People walk away from these responsibilities all the time. The mere fact that you're still there, the mere fact that you're taking this on is an amazing thing that you should never dismiss. But please remember, you are not alone in this. You want to hear a funny story about how I invented the fist bump? Do you want to hear it? So this is a funny story. So I fist bumped this kid the other day. And by the way, I'm going to talk for a little while. I think I'm supposed to go till 10:45, and I could talk until 3:45 if you want, because I love doing this. But I will tell you this story. And 100 years ago, that's an exaggeration, I was working in the VA, and I would leave work, and I would have to come to this intersection that was this horrible intersection, and I could never get through this intersection. And so I learned how to get through it, which was to just cheat my way to the front of the line, jump in, turn right at the light, and what have you. Well, this intersection was in Baltimore, and there was the Unsell School was there. Unsell is the last name of Wes Unsell, who was an NBA basketball player, and his wife was a academic and had to move around professionally. And towards the end of Wes's career, she started a school for stressed, wayward children that were getting in trouble in school. And so there was this school right there, and I would always pull down, and I would always think of Wes's career, and he was an undersized NBA. Do you know who Wes Unsell is? Yeah, he was. For those that don't, this was in the 70s, and I think he retired in 79. They won the championship. I think it was 72. And then they moved from Baltimore to D.C., but he still had his roots in Baltimore. And if you don't know who Wes Unsell is, imagine if Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley had a love child. That would be Wes Unsell. So I'm sitting there at this light, and this car wouldn't let me in. So I got in, right? And, I got skills like that. I got in, and I was all wound up and stressed, and I waved, but not with all 5 fingers, to acknowledge that I got in. And I'm sitting there in my little Honda Civic. The air conditioning doesn't work. The radio didn't even work. I had one of those boom boxes, sitting on the seat. And so I'm sitting there. After you get in like that and you wave to the person behind you, and then you're stopped at a long light, life slows down. And so I'm sitting there trying to act like I don't even know what's going on, playing with my radio, and I feel an eclipse of the sun from the car. All of a sudden, the whole cabin of the car goes dark, and then I literally feel myself go like this, and I look over to the left, and there's Wes Unsell leaning into my car. Biggest man I've ever seen in my life. And afros were in then. He had this big afro, big man, just completely blocked out the sun. And Wes Unsell said to me, he goes, "Son, is there anything about the last 30 seconds of your life you want to reconsider?" And I said, "Mr. Unsell, did you just say it was the last 30 seconds of my life?" And you know what Wes did? Wes laughed. This is a true story. Wes laughed at me. He goes, "Son, I don't even know you, but I know 2 things about you. I know you got a hell of a temper, and I know you got a hell of a sense of humor. Your temper got you into this. Your sense of humor just got you out of this. I suggest you pick a path. Follow one of those talents that you have. It's your choice. I'm just making the suggestion." And then Wes reached in with the biggest hand I've ever seen in my life. And back in the day, we would dap, one of these. And I just could not trust that big hand coming down on me. So he's standing there like that, and I just went like this because I thought it was safer. And we both pulled back and invented the fist bump. You have me to thank for that. But all my life, these messages have been coming to me. And all my life, I ignored them because I thought I knew the path I was on and what was best for me and the people that I loved and cared for. What's on that handout that I didn't fill in? Oh, humor. You know what humor is? Humor is a healthy understanding of moments others reject. It's more of a leadership thing, but it's also a team building thing, that if you are in a group and people are laughing and somebody is not laughing with you, then they've not quite embraced the group that you're in. Humor is a shared experience, and humor is amazingly beneficial. What else was on there? Oh, reap to sow is reveal expectations, exceed promises, to serve others well. These are leadership tips that I give people in the industry. Revealing expectations in all relationships is a very powerful thing to do. And acknowledging the limits of those expectations. Revealing your expectations in all relationships is amazing, because your expectations, if you don't reveal them, can become those self-fulfilling prophecies of failure and disappointment, because they may not be realistic. So revealing them early for people that you're going to allow into your life to work with you and support you is very important, so that they can say, I can't meet that expectation, but here's what I can do. And then you make promises there. Reveal expectations and exceed promises to serve others well. A huge one in the senior living industry, whether it's independent living, assisted living, or nursing home, or what have you, is that you ask a family, why did you come to work with us? Well, mom was falling, or mom was wandering, but mom fell, and we were at a picnic, and we didn't get back for 12 hours, and we couldn't get to her. So we're just worried, and she wanders every now and then. We're afraid that she's going to wander off and fall. So we want some help. So they move in, and everything's going great. And then, 4 or 5 weeks in, mom has a fall, and the family comes in and goes, well, what happened? And I'm like, well, gravity works here as well as it works there. Now, I'm not being a smart aleck here, but the point is that falling is the issue, and some things we cannot ultimately prevent. So if your expectation is that she'll never fall again, we want to talk about that now for both parties, because it's not a realistic expectation. And exceeding the promise is that, but if a fall does occur, we'll be there, quickly. We'll respond, we'll provide treatment, we'll provide intervention, we'll provide communication, we'll come up with another plan. Just an example of the reveal expectations, exceed promises. Whether it's home care or wherever, revealing those expectations is helpful, because it can open a dialogue. The caregiver guilt. Yes, guilt is gathering unrealistic, illogical, loathing thoughts. Most guilt is created. It's just not real. It is real. It's very real, but it's also a lie. It's fabricated in your mind. You're guilty about things that you could never have avoided. You're guilty because you didn't see the future. You're guilty because you didn't prevent something that was unpreventable. You're guilty because you've been given a damn impossible job. My name is Lon Kieffer. I'm known as the Defender of Caregivers. Thank you all for your time today.